you want to replay them at any point, you can go into the schedule on studentsunions.co.uk and just click view past sessions, and then you can see everything that's going on. So yeah, again, we've got about 45 minutes for this session. I'm really pleased and proud to welcome our sponsor and one of our sponsors, MSL, based out of the West Midlands. So I will hand over to Gary, and of course, if you want to ask any questions or any points of clarification, please do that in the chat and the Q&A. So over to you, Gary.
That's very kind. Thanks very much for the welcome, and thanks for the invite. It's great to be here, everyone. In fact, I remember meeting with John at Coventry over coffee in probably what seems like a different time now, really. When they were talking about some plans to help bring sort of the SU community together. And I'm not quite sure this was originally how it was imagined, but I'm very grateful that they have made it happen. So yeah, it's great to be here. And yeah, and thank you to everybody who's attended the session. I say I've sort of been quite fortunate to meet a number of you in person, sort of pre-COVID, and more latterly over Teams since I joined MSL, which was about this time last year. And in fact, my plan for this year was and is to carry on meeting many more of you. You know, whether that's socially distanced or virtually. Well, let's see how things plan out. Hopefully a number of you know MSL already. I'm sure a number of you do. I recognise obviously some names in the session already, which is great. So welcome to people who already work with us, or indeed people who don't work with us. So yeah, if you don't know us, we're based, as I've said, we're actually based at Warwick SU, which the building I'm in today, unusually. And I have been working from home mostly, which I'm sure most of us have been as well. But it's, so MSL, if you don't know us, so basically we build and deliver digital student engagement solutions to enable our student union and association clients in the UK and also internationally, sort of to enhance and enrich the experience of their student members. And I'm going to make reference to some of our clients' experiences later on, but the focus of this is not purely MSL. You know, a lot of what we're going to talk about is achievable irrespective of which platform you use. Obviously, clearly, I prefer it was MSL, but recognise that there are other options out there. For those of you who have not actually managed to meet in person as yet, I'll make a brief introduction to me. So yeah, my name's Gary Bryans, and I'm Chief Exec of MSL. But I suppose for the purpose of this session, what may be of interest is that prior to joining MSL, I've been working in technology businesses, which have been solely focused within the education sector for the last 20 years. So I guess in that time, I've been doing blended since before it was blended, and a whole range of different projects from a single small institution to a whole country and everything in between. And so that's hopefully give me a few insights, which whether good, bad, or indifferent, I'll let you decide. But it gives me perhaps a different perspective, which I'm happy to share, both during the course of today, but also as when we get a chance to meet. So in terms, if we go on to the next slide and sort of look at the intro for this session, we posed a couple of questions really. And I'm not necessarily sure we're going to answer both of these during the course of today, but hopefully it will give you an idea of some of the things we might start to think about. So excuse me one second. Let's just move that over here. Yeah, so we'll have a sort of think about these questions over the next sort of 30 minutes or so. And as we all know, sort of 2020 has brought some particularly new and interesting challenges, and many of which I think we're all still trying to figure out. And for the sector in particular, I'm particularly aware that what this means for you, and how do you now potentially have to digitally support and engage with your student members in a different but still meaningful way. But also it's potentially accelerated the need to grasp some of the opportunities that to digital transform has to offer. I know the concept of sort of the digital native. By the way, it's not always a term I necessarily agree with, or or a definition I agree with, but it's been around for some time. And I think I'm somebody who's got 2 teenage children who not quite at university age, but not far off. The mere concept of a world for them that predates not only the internet, but the internet being in the palm of their hands is just beyond their comprehension. They can't even watch a TikTok video to understand it. And so most students, most of whom will be in that younger demographic, they no longer simply expect to access, support and engage with the services you offer online. Oftentimes they actually now need to, and because particularly because what COVID's brought, and that's whenever and however they may wish. And so, whilst we're all hoping for a scientific breakthrough to make this all go away, I think the likelihood that such a thing happens, or at least happens in a straightforward way, does seem now seems increasingly unlikely. And it's a hackneyed phrase, but this is the new normal for now. And we can't get back into our time machine and go back to 2019, and with all the dramas that brought, which in context may seem a bit shallow now. So instead, we've got to think about how we can get into our time machine and move forward, and perhaps try and have a peek into the future, and hopefully we'll be able to have a look at what some practical things that we can do today. So if we move on to the next slide, please, Amanda. If you've come here today looking for all of the answers, I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. You won't be getting them. So and worse still, I might actually leave you with more questions. So yeah, apologies if that means I've just lost half my audience. I'm sorry, but I think collectively, I think we can start to figure some of this stuff out. And today is very much about sort of starting a conversation and recognizing that different people are on different stages along this particular journey. And this conversation, we're more than happy to continue with you afterwards. And indeed, part of what we're very keen to do is also facilitate conversations between colleagues as well. And I think, sorry, Amanda, next slide, if that's okay. I think the one thing that I always come back to, and people may have heard me talk about this a few times, is this is all about context as well. So when we think about digital transformation, it's actually about what's relevant for you. So whilst we have some universal challenges and also opportunities, how you are able to respond to them is very much dependent upon your union's individual context. And that, because it does differ, whilst we have some common bonds, just by virtue of whether it might be geography or the size of institution or the university relationship we have, etc., varies considerably. So there are some differences there, and I think that sort of brings to life a phrase which I've coined by Professor Dylan Willing, which I use, which quite often is, in fact, I've taken this out of context, but I think it's really relevant, which is, everything works somewhere, but not necessarily nothing works everywhere. So yeah, everything works somewhere, but nothing works everywhere. And so I think there's a truism to that. So that, there's no silver bullet and no easy fix for some of these things, because something may work for somebody. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you, but you might be able to draw some inspiration for it and adapt it and think about how it could work for you. And it just means that there is no one size fits all solution. Every union must determine what their unique digital transformation path looks like, and what are the services that would benefit most of your members or have the potential to have the highest impact. Where do we start first? And I know a number of you already are already quite a long way along your digital transformation journey, whereas some of you may not have been until now, and you're jumping right in to overhaul your offer that you have for your students. And for others, it could be that we're just going to start to automate some processes, and I'll come back to some sort of definitions a bit later on. And it may be that transformation is not the best place to start. It maybe we just take some practical solutions that we can look at today, or it could be, and it probably is, a mix of all those things. So one thing that's come up is this is a bit of a meme which has been going around. Sorry, next slide, please, Amanda. Is around who's leading the digital transformation of your organisation, and it could be. Is it the chief exec? So is the chief exec within the organisation setting the direction and tone for that digital transformation? It's quite possible. Or alternatively, is it a director of digital or somebody responsible for the digital delivery of digital services? But actually, what we've seen quite often at this moment in time, and this is not related, this is not purely SUs. This is industry wide across a whole range of different sectors. Actually, COVID-19 has almost been leading the transformation. It's really accelerated the way that things are happening. And whilst I admit there's a meme, this is a meme, and I've adopted it, but I think there's an element of truth in here. And so for organizations and people, this is already accelerated their transformation in one fell swoop. in fact, if we go on to, yeah, if you think about the workplace, and I say not just within the SU context, but in the workplace. So next slide, please, Amanda. You know, a number of organizations, you know, until quite recently, you know, have this notion of actually, you know, we don't allow remote work. And, you know, if you start to think about digital transformation, we think about, you know, how quickly some of these things change. So we've gone from that, you know, just a few weeks ago to, next slide, please, Amanda, to the Zoom shirt. I don't know if anyone saw this on Monday. I'm not sure I've qualified today. But yeah, so I'm sure it's probably one of these things which will enter into the dictionary by the end of the year. And this is just taking place in just a few weeks. So yeah, so the Zoom shirt, in case those of you haven't seen it, is basically, you know, the idea that people keep a shirt on the back of their chair for when they're going to jump onto Zoom meetings, which they put on. Unfortunately, I can't see you all live currently to check how true that is, but it just show how how quickly transformation can happen if circumstances demand it. And I think, you know, the reason why I you know, this is a bit of a silly example, but the reason why I mentioned this is just, this is a real, you know, it's a small but real world example of how meaningfully and quickly we can potentially change not only the way we work, but in this scenario here, you know, even our shopping patterns. So not just where we shop, you know, in terms of the clothing we may now start to wear, but also when. And I think this is just an example, you know, it may be a twee example, but it's a bit of an example of actually of, you know, how we need to think differently about some of these things. I suppose you know this already, but just in case, you know, we're really clear about this. You know, digital transformation, it's not about technology. It's about people and it's about change, which of course makes it, you know, significantly more complicated than technology. So you know far better than I do. You know that the student unions are you know, you are people. We are people orientated organisations, and you'll always remain so. You know, and you provide an amazing amount of services for the engagement and the enrichment of the student body. And you know, it doesn't necessarily always make sense to digitize everything. So it's certainly worthwhile thinking about these things. And although, you know, it might, you know, but it might make sense to really question why you wouldn't digitize things. So it's worth, you know, I think it's an inflection point really starts to, you know, ask ourselves some of these questions as we look at the sort of services and how we work with our student body. You know, and oftentimes, you know, people are naturally reluctant to change how things have been done, which is fine. You know, we have to respect and understand that, and it may be for very good reason, but it also might be worth digging a little deeper to understand if resistance to change is, you know, could actually today in particular be limiting either the quality or potentially the quantity of what you're able to offer to your members. You know, in fact, can digital extend your reach and therefore your impact? And again, think about how you may think about the services which you work with and deliver in doing that. You know, and one effects of COVID, I suppose, has been this openness to change and rapid change at that. So, you know, for those of you who are, you know, who are keen on these types of things, you know, it's a good inflection point to really try and capitalize on it. And you know, an approach could be saying, you know, we'll take digital first as a starting point. So in other words, you know, when you think about the delivery of the rich range of services that you provide for your student members, you know, maybe think about, okay, let's think about doing it digitally first or digitally enhanced first, unless there's a good reason not to. But, you know, please do remember, you know, technology, you know, it's only an enabler. It's a tool, you know, it's only as good as the person using it. The reason I'm in the office, you know, is actually we've got some guys next door doing a bit of work for us. You know, and thank goodness it's not me, because, you know, I'm hopeless at that type of thing. You know, we've put a drill in my hands and you've got trouble, you know, at all the very least tuning ill-placed in practical holes. So, you know, it is very much about, you know, having the tools in the hand in the right hands of people, and, you know, and skilled hands at that. So one thing I thought to talk about briefly, and I'll come on some practical examples a bit later on, is just to think about sort of a definition of what digital transformation is, and maybe, as you'd expect, it's with such a nebulous term that there is no single definition. So you know, I wouldn't get too worried about that. Oops. So yeah, I wouldn't get too worried about that. I think that's, you know, because, you know, whether whether it's about your clubs and society and the memberships they have, whether it is about your activities, whether it is about democracy, advocacy, volunteering, employability, and access to those things. I'd say the digital transformation can manifest itself in a number of ways. And I say, because there is as it is a nebulous term, you can define it a little bit better. But I think the one thing I did want to sort of draw a distinction between, it is worth thinking about, is the distinction between automation and transformation. So, and we should think about distinguishing the two. Not that they're both complementary in this world, I guess. So, in the world of industry, there are people who talk about business process automation, which is a bit of a dry term, and it's really just the act of sort of streamlining processes to using software to sort of automate some things and make it easier or faster or sometimes cheaper. I think it's worthwhile mentioning cheaper, if you like, because there are some potentially some constraints that we are all going to face as the impact of COVID continues to work its way through higher education in particular. But again, these things can be done by by a single area or by department. So again, you don't necessarily have to do all of these things across the whole organization as one fell swoop. It could be you just start to pick off elements of it. And again, you probably do some of these things already. So that's, so digital transformation is more than just digitizing your information or enhancing your traditional methods. It's more about how you can modernize how the union works and how the service you offer and how they're accessed. But that said, I say automation is often a great jumping off point for various transformation projects. So absolutely do not dismiss it. It's a really helpful thing to do. And the way I think about digital transformation, there's a model which always comes to the back of my mind, and sorry, the next slide, if that's okay. And I mentioned earlier on, there's tons of fancy models out there. So, you look at the big consulting companies and they'll have lots of models for digital transformation, the McKinseys and Bains of this world. But as I mentioned my sort of history in education technology, and there's a model from that world, the world of digital learning, which I always sort of come back to as a touch point, because I think it's a really helpful one actually to help, understand what digital transformation is and some of the steps along the way. It's called the SAMR model, and it was developed by a guy over in the States, Ruben Pichendra, and it basically helps us to think about what the different steps are along the sort of transformation journey. And I say I'll talk them through them. So the first is substitution. And this is about, how can technology act as a substitute with no functional change? So one way to think about that is, an example is, moving from pen and paper to a Word document for editing. So in that, the difference is you can save various versions. It's easier, more efficient to edit and format your writing. And then the next stage on from that, though, is augmentation. And so basically what we're talking about here is, okay, you're writing something in Word, and now you start to use some of the additional tools around that. So, you're using spell checks, which I use all the time, grammar checks, you might be using a thesaurus or word counts. You can start to insert and embed images and graphics. And so that's the sort of the next stage, you can email on your finished work. And that's sort of the next stage, I suppose. So moving from some substitution onto augmentation. So you're starting to be able to do things differently. But at this stage, you're still in the sort of the automation stage, if you like. And so as we begin to move on, so this about what Ruben calls enhancements. These stages are more about automation than transformation. But as we move on to the M, and the M is about modification. And this is where technology enables you to do things differently. So now instead of having a Word document, documents are now online, and we can share it and we can collaborate on it with others for editing and feedback from colleagues, and we can do it at any time. So now we're starting to do things differently. And the reason, I'm using this real world example just to try and explain the difference between that automation and transformation flow. And then the next step is move on to R, it's redefinition. And this is where we can do things which we couldn't actually do before without technology. And so here, we can meet on a Teams or a Zoom meeting, which we in the MSL team do all the time, and you can use those discussions to identify common solutions. You can work with others who have expertise in those areas in different ways, and then you might be able to publish out to the web and have other people comment on it. And so it's a way of actually sort of working through that process. Same process of actually you're creating something, but actually now you're creating it in a different way and enabling a whole different approach to it. And that's when you start getting into that transformation stage. So I use that just as an example when I'm talking about the difference between automation and transformation. That's the sort of journey we're looking at. And actually, I think about this in a sort of a real world example of some of the things that we do or have facilitated. One way of thinking about this is, for instance, let me think. So one of the things we do, for instance, is enabling SUs to manage expense claims for their clubs and societies members in an easier way. So this is one thing we do. I'll use it just as an example, just to talk about sort of some ideas of how this manifests itself in practice. So example is that rather than filling in a piece of paper for an expense claim, a member of a club or society instead fills in a digital form, and they can then email that, and that's great. Again, I think we're probably still in the substitution stage here, because effectively what I'm doing is digitally walking that piece of digital paper to somebody else to open up as an attachment, and they can then somehow approve it, or maybe they can type approve, and then they can digitally walk it to somebody else who has to do something with it, like create a record of it and say a spreadsheet. And then when that club member wants to receive their money, they can go to the finance office and receive their money, only they won't know if it's been approved or rejected. So at that stage, we're still in the sort of the enhancement area, I suppose, in terms of substitution and augmentation. But the modification stage is really around where actually, if I want to submit that claim, I can do so with a click of a button, and I as an individual submit that claim, click of a button, and then a workflow begins, which begins an automated process. So actually, that claim is automatically channeled to relevant approvers, and they can then approve it. It can automatically be applied. A policy can be applied to it automatically and follow that policy. And now for me as a user, not only can I see where my claim is at any given point, but the finance team can run a payment on the approved claims, and the money's can appear in my account. So all of a sudden, I'm moving from a world where I'm either having to use paper forms, etc., or even sort of electronic form, and then click and submit that. Or sorry, Amanda, switch a couple of slides if that's okay. Sorry, and onto the next slide again, please, altogether. And then so they say they can. So here's an example, for instance, I'll say the one we've looked at here. So I'll go in, I click on the money request. Again, I can do a bank transfer, I can enter my bank account details. Again, this is all done online. So again, this is where an example, I suppose, of where we're starting to move from automation to transformation. And this might be quite a dry example, but it's just one of the things which you might want to think about of actually how can we achieve some of those things. And again, if we start to think about some of the impacts of COVID as well, it's where you don't necessarily want people to have to come into a finance office to submit either request forms or hand forms over. So it's just an example of an approach. The thing I guess as well with the sort of with that model is it helps, I suppose, to ask some questions at different stages. So what's the gain of replacing existing ways of doing things digitally? And there might not be a gain. So if there isn't, don't do it. I'm not recommending that's the thing you should do. But the other question, I suppose, then when we get to augmentation is does doing things digitally add new features and functionality to our services, to our members, than the way we did it previously? Or at the modification stage, will this allow us, sorry, next slide, please, Amanda. Will this allow us to deliver the service differently and actually allow us to improve on it? And indeed, once we get to the final stage in this, is does it actually enable us to create a new service delivery model or method or service which previously was inconceivable? So I think there's just, it's just a model I refer to. There's tons of models out there. I'm not saying this is the right one, but it's one that I always sort of refer back to as a touchstone, because I think it helps just think about these things. So I suppose that's hopefully will have been helpful in terms of setting the sort of the context a little bit, I guess, around, you know, digital transformation and what we actually mean by it. And the next stage, I guess, is to think about. Sorry, next slide, please, Amanda. Is to you know, get into our time machine and start to sort of think about what the future might look like. Well, the truth is, you don't actually have to go very far. Because in some instances, you know, the future is already here. And I'm going to share a few examples of some of the things that I've seen clients do. And in fact, some of our clients are maybe in the call actually. So thank you for what you do, using the MSL platform. But again, you know, I say this isn't just limited to MSL. I'm sure there are other platforms you can achieve these things on. And again, I think the key thing from this is, you know, any of these changes, they don't have to be revolutionary to improve the impact you have for your student membership. So again, you know, the best way to eat the elephant is in bite-sized chunks. So just think about areas where you might want to think about how you might be able to improve some of these things. I say I could spend all day on a number of these, but I'll just choose a few examples of some things which colleagues are doing. So the first one here, this is obviously a pre-COVID photo, but colleagues here at Essex. And one of the things they've done here is thinking about personalization. So actually, how can I start to personalize the user experience? So if our members are coming to us digitally or digitally first, then and they're accessing things about us, then how do we personalize that experience for them? And so what they've done here is basically they've had sort of the ability to you know, pick your campus. And this is an example here, by the way. This the whole range. If you haven't got different campuses, the principle's the same and can be applied in a whole range of different ways. So, you know, if I pick on, you know, Colchester or Loughton or Southend, whichever one it may be, then actually the information that's returned to me is more relevant to me based on where I'm geographically based. Now that's a geographic distinction of how I can use digital to sort of to transform the way that my members engage with my services. But you know, I know that, for instance, colleagues at Coventry and elsewhere have done some really interesting stuff of how you can group together people who are like-minded or have similar interests to actually shape their experience that they have when they're engaging with you through your digital presence. So that's just one example. And again, you know, it's relatively straightforward of actually how you can think about these things and how you can personalize those things. But I think it's just a worthwhile example. So the next one here we're looking at is again, a couple of examples here. I think one from Plymouth and actually one from colleagues at Coventry there. And so this is, again, just a practical one. And I know some of you may have seen some of these things before, but it's about, you know, how do you help members who may be new to you or don't know you find the information they're looking for and have the opportunity to you know, sort of participate in activities in whatever shape or form they come. And so it's worthwhile thinking about how you think about navigation and how people find stuff. So you know, the team at Plymouth there, they've had a navigation site section onto their homepage currently, although maybe updated this a few weeks back, and that's really about signposting students to useful information. So in this scenario here, you know, important information around COVID and how it's impacting studies, or how they can access advice and support, but also giving students the option to feed back to the SU so their voices are heard. So actually, you know, it's about trying to create an opportunity for more of a two-way dialogue, and you know, and use the platform to achieve that. Here you'll see that colleagues at Coventry have actually created different news tags and event types sort of appropriate for the current situation we find ourselves in, so that their students can actually find what they need to know, or things they can do without seeing things which are no longer relevant to them. So, you know, for those of you who have more commercially based unions, where historically you might have had club nights and various things, which obviously for now are sort of are on pause, then that type of information is no longer relevant. So actually, how do you surface information which is more relevant to the user, and think about doing things in that way? Another example is, sorry, next slide, please, Amanda. Is Harriet Watt here actually? Harriet Watt here actually have done something of actually how do you How do you help your potential new students find out or express interest in societies which where they not necessarily may not necessarily have had the ability to have had the full experience of a freshers fair, etc., just because of some of the limitations that may be available there. And so what they've done here is set up sort of taster sessions. And again, I know remember you may have done this already, and it's really about trying to think about how you might be able to encourage participation, particularly if students aren't and particularly potentially new students, freshers are not necessarily quite sure of what they want at this stage. And it's a way for your clubs and societies to start to build a relationship with members or prospective members. So they can automate some of that process of enabling them to join a group, and then potentially automating some of the process of sending them a welcome email to actually make them feel more welcome. So again, I just noticed actually this is the Brewing Society, so maybe taster membership is the wrong word, or maybe not, as the case may be. But yeah, that's just another practical example, I guess. So these are small subtle changes that you're able to make with again with some of the tools available to you, whether it's an MSL or indeed any other system. So yeah, another example, I guess, if we move on, is also how can you start to share more information with your committee members, so that they can see more information about their membership with the demographics without necessarily having to access sort of personal data. And again, it's just a way of surfacing information in different ways. So again, all this information historically existed. So we're not sort of creating new stuff here necessarily, but what we are doing is enabling the access to that in a different way, so that people can see information which is relevant. And again, because it's digital, they can access it from anywhere. So there's no constraints of how they can access these things. So it's just about trying to surface this information and data in new and different ways. Or indeed, actually, if we move on to the next stage, it could even be as much, as far as how you as a union are able to support activities, whatever form those activities may take. So whether they are in person or indeed online. So how can we start to move some of those processes online? So whether it be risk assessments, trip registrations, if we're able to start to undertake trips, and using things like we've got here, so say activities management, to support your clubs and societies in a way which enables you as SUs to discharge your sort of your duties, I guess, in some respects, but also enable those clubs and societies to organize themselves in a better way and make themselves more efficient and create better and richer events and the like. I say whether those are in person or not, and again, time we'll see here. But I suppose it's a way of thinking about if there are things that you do consistently all the time, and again, it's about some of the automation piece, I guess, to start with, of for instance, checklists or attendee registers or booking rooms or transport or fixture details, whatever it might be, no longer needing to have paper forms to facilitate all of that, and instead being able to do that digitally and online. And then also, of course, the other sort of side benefit of this as well is sort of reducing some of that avoidable contact. So again, without no longer having paper form for submissions, this allows you to do that. And also, the whole idea of this is also give more visibility, more transparency, make your lives easier in terms of those people involved in activities management, but also students' lives easier as well in the process. So again, that's another sort of practical example of how you can use some of the existing tools to think about how you might be able to do things differently during this coming academic year, indeed future academic years. Again, thinking about how you can provide more visibility and do things differently. The example we've got here actually is for your officers to engage more, or sorry, enable them to engage more with members, and to give more visibility, particularly if they're not necessarily always able to be physically present with members. Obviously we've got a number of universities announcing their return. Not all those details are clear as yet. And it might be, it seems that there's going to be a lot of blended learning approaches coaches, there's going to be bubbles, a whole range of different things, which again, your institutions are all managing in different ways. So we're not always necessarily going to be able to always have that physical presence, where people may either meet people face to face or come to the union building all the time. So instead, how can we actually enable, as a officers to engage more with their members? So example here is actually, is one of our clients here, where they're enabling their officers to be able to share with their members things they're working on. So not only things they're working on, and also things they've progressed as well. So if your officers have stood on a manifesto, which obviously, say, things may have changed in terms of that manifesto, in terms of what they're able to achieve physically, but actually, if they stood on a manifesto, how can they actually, how can they hold themselves to account to the people who elected them, but also show the progress they've made and celebrate that progress? And again, this is just a really practical way of doing that. So another opportunity here in terms of surfacing information is, and again, this is where we start to move into some of that transformation side of things, I guess, in some respects. So most of you will already be doing voting and democracy in some form of digital form. So whether it's with historically with polling booths, so going to a polling booth to cast a vote digitally, whether it's being able to cast votes through the website or through the app, etc. But I think the use of data and be able to display data in different ways to try and drive behaviors is a really interesting one, I think. And again, with MSL, you probably appreciate there's tons and tons of data, and we constantly think about different ways of how we can start to surface that data in different ways, so that actually it can help you and also help your members to engage in different ways. So here example we've got here is actually showing live voting stats. So actually, it does seeing these stats, and again, you can display them in different places on your website or physically in different display screens, etc. Does that then start to drive behavior? Because actually now, not only can I cast my vote, but actually I can see also what the impact that has had, or indeed if I haven't cast my vote, I can potentially go in and see if that has what change, that difference that makes. And of course, historically, of course, we go into a polling booth if we used to do things paper based, and of course, we don't find out about these things till very much later or after the event, or indeed if at all. So again, this is about trying to provide more transparency and potentially help to support drive different behavioral changes, which you can do. And again, it's part of this whole transformation project. And again, I mentioned earlier on, one way is we think about these things as well, is using obviously the StudentLink app, of actually voting differently. How do we vote? That can manifest itself in different ways. So yes, we can go onto the website, but also we can go on and cast a vote through an app, and we're trying to make it easier in terms of that, in terms of going onto ballot pages, so that you can actually go and see the candidates, you can see the manifestos, you can cast your vote all through the relative comfort, of course, of an app. Now there are pluses and minuses to apps, by the way. So I think if you're thinking about the app, it's useful thinking about what it is you want to achieve from using an app and how that's done. But again, using apps are a really interesting way to if you think again, I talked earlier on about how our members access our services, and again, if that's going to be digital first, and being able to gain some digital real estate on the device, which they'll have on their person at all times, can be very, very, very powerful. And again, enabling them to actually engage with services through that can then present itself as with a range of different opportunities which otherwise wouldn't be available. Again, talking about stats, I think colleagues here have done some really interesting stuff around their volunteering stats. So again, we've got some really interesting stuff going on with volunteering, and the volunteering is actually a bit of a narrow definition. This is about sort of volunteering and employability, and it's about actually how do you recognize the participation of your student body in either individual activities, which might be volunteering, or it might be participating in clubs or societies, it might be as officers. How do you recognize that? How do you enable them to identify the skills that they've gained through those types of activities, so that actually and again, recognize this is not all about employability, but actually they can take some of those things away with them, and actually also then use those to support them onto their next stage of their life journey in terms of employability. But also at the same time, how can we celebrate all the work that we do? And again, I think colleagues here at Plymouth done a great job of surfacing information in terms of volunteering stats. You know, of the number of volunteers that have participated, how many hours have actually been logged in the system and been recorded. You know, I think it's a great way of celebrating everything that's actually taking place. There's just a small snippet here of some of the things they've been doing, but also for the individuals to go in and find opportunities in which they can participate, where they can go in and manage their own profile, where they can identify the skills, they can log hours. So again, it's just a really different way, I guess, of facilitating volunteering. And I think particularly, again, you know, so there are COVID elements to all these things, unfortunately, at this moment in time, thread through of, you know, if these things can't be done in a face-to-face way, then actually how can we still support some of these activities, but do it in a different way? And yeah, I'll finish on probably this one as an example. This is actually, I love this one as an example, and this is a way of thinking about things very differently. And so credit, kudos to Robert Gordon here for the approach they've taken here, which I think is really interesting. So this is a campaign they had, or I think still have, called Live Right, and it's obviously to do with housing and affordable accommodation whilst they're studying at Robert Gordon. So it's both taking a campaign, making that campaign digital, but also then providing some additional tools. And I think what they've done is really interesting. So effectively what they've done here is said, okay, well, look, first of all, you know, how do we get that information out there? And forgive me, I'm paraphrasing my interpretation of it. So I'm sure colleagues at Robert Gordon would be happy to share more information of how they got to this point. But first of all, they're able to share information about what some of the issues are, and you know, and how they're helping their student body to address those. So it's an information page, I suppose, as a starting point. You know, obviously they've got embedded videos on that page to explain it more, etc. What the campaign is. But they've taken it really a step further, and I think it's really interesting what they've done here. And it's using a number of tools which you know, okay, they're built into the MSL platform, but I recognize you can do these in different ways, and to do things in a different way. So effectively what they've done is combined different tools. So things like surveys and polls and students from the student voice tools, etc. And effectively what they've done is they've created a I like to think, we think of it as a TripAdvisor for landlords. And so actually students can go in, they can rate, they can comment on their different landlords. And, you know, so it's really about providing some transparency. So it's empowering the students to, you know, give them a voice and also provide some transparency on some of the issues that have been faced in terms of accommodation. So I think, you know, that I think this is a great example there of transformation. So of actually enabling some things using tools which are available today. So I say, we talk about that time machine. It's actually, you know, some of these things are available, you know, today, you know, as we speak. So it's not necessarily that far in the future. You know, it's taking some of those tools and rethinking how you can use them in different ways to achieve what it is you want to be able to achieve. And I think the important thing here is actually, you know, is asking yourself some questions. You know, is really to start with the why. You know, why do we want to do these things, and really help, you know, we can have a really clear definition of that, and then think about what the tools are then around that might be suitable to try and support and deliver on those. So yeah, that's just again just a nice practical example. So I've covered some examples, and I could talk for hours on you know, I said that there are tons and tons of these things, and I actually, you know, say we as MSL we're just the enabler of some of these things with our platform, and it's more about what our clients do and have done. And I say, you know, you can achieve these on other platforms. I'm not saying this isn't necessarily all MSL specific, but obviously, you know, it's the world I'm closer to and follow closely. And I'm always inspired by actually some things people do, no matter how small they are. So we sort of started earlier on, you know, with a question. which was around, or couple of questions really, which was around, can a digital approach help you better meet your student needs? Hopefully the answer to that is yes, but I say it doesn't necessarily have to be all the time. And we also pose the question is what does the path to digital transformation look like, or the path to digital look like? And actually, yeah, if a couple of examples here, I guess, or a couple of things to note here. So the first one is, sorry, Amanda, if you move on, please, is, what does your plan look like? And obviously we all have, our notion of what plan A looks like and what plan B looks like, and actually how real life looks like and how that manifests itself. And so, when you think about digital transformation, this is not something that is going to be necessarily, just very straightforward and, you follow the dots from A to B. And that's fine. That's just the reality of things. Some things will follow a plan B maybe, but actually more realistically, we're going to be closer to the real life model than anything else. And I suppose I know it's twee, and I know it's hackneyed, but it is a truism. Digital transformation is a journey, not a destination. And I think, hopefully this session has been helpful to at least start the conversation around thinking about what that journey looks like for you. And I say all of you are already undoubtedly along this journey in different ways, and at different stages, and with the different elements of your services. And obviously myself and the team at MSL, we're here to support you with some of those enabling technologies we talked about earlier. And so, yeah, if you'd like to continue the conversation with us, say this is really just a starting off point, then please do. Some of you may be aware that we've been running, during the course of this week, actually, there's been tons of things. So there's been some great stuff out there. So thank you particularly, obviously, for colleagues at SU20, and obviously colleagues also running Comms by the Computer this week. So there's some great content out there. So I encourage all of you to make the most of those things which have been made available. And I say we've been very grateful to be invited to contribute to each of those. But also a reminder for those of you who do work with MSL, if you haven't accessed it already, this year we're running a program of training and briefings as well. And I think, as you see, we call it MSL 2020. You've got this, and it is about this notion of, there are things you can do now and you're able to achieve. And you really have got this. We've already seen some fantastic stuff being prepared in readiness for this new academic year. And so, yeah, so what's included within there? So, there's tips for practitioners to sort of make the most of the technology at your fingertips. So some of the things I mentioned earlier on, how you can achieve those. Last week we had a focus on virtual freshers fairs, and what you can achieve with the system. So again, so it's worth, so all these things, all the sessions are recorded, so if you want to go back and have a look at those, please do. And there's also been some really interesting guest sessions as well. So this week we've had Jim Dickinson from Wonky talking about some of the challenges and opportunities for SUs and returning students this autumn. Yesterday we had Adil Latif from AbilityNet talking about some of the practical implications of design for accessibility. We've got some sessions coming with sort of guest speakers from our clients talking about some of the things they've done. So again, do look out for those, because this is about the sharing of knowledge and best practice and between all of us, because everyone's trying to figure some of these things out, and and we're trying to help sort of facilitate some of these conversations. So, and I say, so all those sessions are running live, and they're also archived and available from the page. So please make the most of those. I'm happy to take questions shortly, but yeah, just in case we want to carry on the conversation afterwards as well. Feel free to get in touch with us through all the sort of the usual social channels. So you've got a Twitter handle there, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can obviously drop us an email, visit the website, or if you want to email me personally, then please feel free to do so. So hopefully that was a helpful starting off point for a conversation and some thoughts around what digital transformation looks like in student unions. I say it will vary. There is no single approach, and there are also many starting off points that you'll be at. But hopefully that was helpful just to give a little bit of an idea of some things you may start to think about, or indeed do, both during this current academic year, but also into the future. And so at that point, I'll take a pause, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Great stuff. Thank you, Gary. We have a very short period for questions. So a few different ways. You can either put that as a Q&A, or you can raise your hand.
Thank you, Anna.
Great to see the work of of our Director of Communications featuring so highly in there. Dan Connolly will be proud of himself. No questions? If there are no questions, then it just gives me the chance to thank Gary and the team at MSL. They are one of the sponsors for the event, so thank you as well for sponsoring the event to enable us to put this on. Obviously, there's a range of different organisations that are sponsoring us, including Phoenix Creative, who can help with some MSL integrations if required. But of course, if there are any questions for Gary, I'm sure MSL team would be more than happy to answer those at any point. So thank you all for attending this session. Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Amanda. Great stuff. Thanks ever so much. Have a great day.
Thanks all. Bye-bye now. Okay, we done?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Gary.
No worries, no worries. Okay, thanks, Dan.
Take care.